If acceptance is the first step towards healing, then Browns fans, you can officially start the healing process. A bombshell of a quote from Jimmy Haslam at the NFL owners meetings. We talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. A new era of Cleveland Browns football can officially begin now that Jimmy Haslam has officially taken the blame for the Deshaun Watson trade. Meanwhile, it sounds like patience is virtue when it comes to finding a quarterback to replace Watson, and you can cross trading up off the list of moves that the Browns will make on draft day. I do want to thank you for being an everyday with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends and bonus episodes throughout the week as well. And it's totally free to you. All you got to do, hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you listen to your podcast. And, of course, the Locked On Browns podcast YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discussed today in the comment section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And, yes, usually it's a mock draft Monday here leading up to the draft, but I have foregone that because there is a ton of stuff coming out of the NFL owners meetings as it pertains to the Browns that we need to get into and that we need to discuss. And nothing was bigger than the comments made on Monday by team owner Jimmy Haslam in relation to the Deshaun Watson trade. We have been waiting, longing, wondering if anybody from that organization would take some accountability, would take the blame for swinging the deal that they did for Deshaun Watson and it blowing up royally in their face. And we finally have that from Jimmy Haslam, the rightful person to be the one sort of falling on the sword here, taking the blame here, because he's the owner of the team. Everything stops at his desk. The Deshaun trade was somewhat influenced by him. They continue to say it was an organizational decision. That's something that when I read you these quotes here, you will hear him again allude to. But at the end of the day, like getting the deal done with Deshaun Watson came down to, I'm willing to give him $230 million fully guaranteed to get it to the finish line. And he signed off on it. So it falls at his desk. He is finally is taking some blame. And this is a major, major moment for the Browns franchise in terms of being able to move forward. The exact quote that's making the rounds on social media, everybody's talking about, of course, is when he was asked about the Deshaun thing. And I actually think he was, I don't know if it was unprompted. Obviously, this is happening down in these meetings are happening down in Florida. I am not there down in Florida for this to sort of unfold. So it almost sounds like he sort of led with this, like, let's talk about the elephant in the room. And his quote from there was basically this, quote, "We took a big swing and miss with Deshaun. Man, hearing that is music to, I think, your ears, my ears, everybody's ears." He continued, "We thought we had the quarterback. We didn't, and we gave up a ton of draft picks to get him. So we've got to dig ourselves out of that hole. It was an entire organizational decision, and it ends with D&I. So hold us accountable." So the key parts of this, of course, are the very end there where he says, hold us accountable. We, at the end of the day, it's our team. We have to take ownership of this stuff because we own the team. And if you were looking for somebody to blame, yes, you can blame us first and foremost. But it was a team effort here. It was a group effort here. And there's a number of tentacles that sort of branch off in terms of like what that means for how the team moves forward. And I'll talk about that coming up. But in terms of just the straight up acceptance here from Jimmy Haslam and D Haslam that this was a miss. It is it is something the fans, I think, needed. It is something that you needed to hear as fans, that they weren't just going to blindly try to spin this off as like something that they got right and it just didn't work out. No, like there is an acceptance that this was wrong. And that's huge because you don't always get that in sports. You don't always get that from organizations. There's a lot of smartest guy in the room, personas that leak out in these types of settings, whether it's owners, whether it's coaches, whether it's GMs who believe that they can do no wrong and they've done no wrong and they find excuses for everything. And I do think Jimmy Haslam's the type of owner that people view outside externally as someone who would sort of concede to those things, that would kind of come out and say like, no, this wasn't our fault, blah, blah, blah. Or, we didn't get it wrong. It just didn't. But to hear him accept and take accountability, I think is something that Browns fans truly needed to hear. And I think it officially allows everyone to move forward. The fans, at some point, Deshaun, the team, and that's the most important part of this, because I led, in my cold open, I said it, a new era of Cleveland Browns football can officially begin. It feels like this was the quote that was missing to officially accept that or treat this as what it should be this offseason, which is at least a minor rebuild. I get that they're trying to keep the same core players in place. They just re-upped Myles Garrett after the standoff that they had earlier this offseason to keep him around for years to come and hopefully fulfill that destiny of going from Cleveland to Canton to the Hall of Fame. Denzel Ward still here, guy they've locked up for a longer period of time. There was conversations that apparently the Browns were meeting with David Njoku's representatives when they were down holding a private workout with Cam Ward in Miami last week. So maybe they're trying to extend him longer term. So some of the foundational pieces are still very much a part of this team, and they're trying to build around those guys while tweaking the roster in key spots and overhauling the roster in other spots in order to get this thing back on track as quickly as possible. So it's at least a minor rebuild, but hearing Jimmy Haslam say this, I think allows everyone to realize that and allows everyone to just take a step forward and say, okay, this is where we're at then. We're not going to stay caught up in this Deshaun Watson whirlwind and see and play this game of like, let's see what he looks like when he heals up and he comes back next year. Or there's no more like talking about that. There's no more conversation around that and wondering what this organization is going to do. These comments, and I'll read them to you again. We took a big swing and a miss with Deshaun. We thought we had a quarterback. We didn't. We gave up a lot of draft picks to get him, so we have to dig ourselves out of that hole. Boom, right there. That tells me the door is closed. They are ready to move forward without Deshaun, and the understanding that they are ready to move forward without Deshaun and that they're looking elsewhere at that position and with this roster about how they want to build this team moving forward, that is massive in terms of triggering that thing that I said at the top of the show, a new era of Cleveland Browns football officially beginning. It's acceptance from them. It's acceptance from the organization top to bottom. It's them individually, the organization top to bottom. And then it's acceptance from the fans that, okay, we can all move forward. And I talk about, I joke with the acceptance is the first step towards healing in a healing process. And I joke about that as, sort of like this therapeutic method that we can all sort of accept here. But for fans like you, I do think this, if you're somebody who hated this trade from the start, if you're somebody who, at least by the end of year 3 this past year, was also over it and couldn't believe that the organization did this and set things back and all of that, this allows you now to move forward and understand like where they're at. It's not like a full-fledged apology or anything to fans for making the deal if you hated it from the jump, which there are plenty of people who did. But it is that acceptance, I think, that sense of responsibility, the accountability that's being shown, I think should be a positive bridge building moment, or a how do I put this? Almost like a let's lock hands, sing Kumbaya, and mend this relationship. A mending of relationships, is mending fences is maybe a good way to put it. Like, this should be something that progresses the relationship between team and fans forward. Because as I've talked about, last year was the most lethargic I have felt about the most lethargic feeling about the Cleveland Browns in this town that I've ever experienced. People just they didn't care. There was a resounding sense of apathy. Like it just did not feel like people cared about this team. And the Deshaun trade, I think, was the root of all these things that really drove people away to feeling like the team betrayed them and the team And I've always said, and I stand by this, that like trading for Deshaun Watson, I get the reasoning behind it. They were trying to find a franchise quarterback. They picked the wrong one for a number of reasons, as we now know. The injuries have piled up now. He was 2 years out of football, clearly didn't see the game and play the game the way that he once did. And the off the field stuff was a big part of that as well. So I don't blame them for trying, but there was definitely like a sense of like, why am I wasting my time with this team anymore when they just do stupid things and they've set the organization back for so many years? But this feels like a massive and monumental, important step forward for ownership to own this and be able to say, we'll take accountability and we're going to work to get ourselves out of this hole as quickly as possible. And I think this is a chance to mend fences. I do. Like, I hope that's how you feel as a fan of this team, but like in Brown's history, to be able to essentially put to bed the entire Deshaun Watson ordeal, even though he's still on the team. I know he's still on the team, but this gives off this seems to present like we are going to do what we can to get away from Deshaun next year when his salary cap hit. We can make him a post June 1st cut and spread that money out over two seasons and make it a little bit more easier to eat. That feels like where this is headed, and them admitting that they're ready to move on and turn that page allows everybody else to move on and turn that page. So those who have been saying that this organization needs to rebuild, those who have been saying this organization is in a bad spot and set back and all those things, it feels like they recognize that and they know that, and they're not closing the door on that era and looking ahead to what's next, even if that means it takes a couple years to kind of get this thing back on track. And that's an important piece here, because there's another quote from Jimmy Haslam at the owners' meetings I want to share with you that I think speaks to that specifically, that idea of patience for the organization to get back on track. And when it comes to the draft here in a couple weeks, what they'll do at number 2 and potentially beyond, pressure or not, on Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski. That's kind of where I'm going with this. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. March Madness is here, and FanDuel's giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. Speaking of Cinderella stories, we unfortunately did not have any in this year's tournament. It's been a point of contention for so many sports fans out there, or basketball fans out there, that there weren't a lot of upsets, which tend to be the lifeblood of college basketball this time of year. That's okay, though, because I'm sure many of you played your cards right when you filled out brackets or when you're betting, and you still threw some money on some of the favorites to win it all, because usually that's how these things shake out. The best teams generally reign supreme towards the end of this thing, and as it turns out this year, we got all 4 1 seeds with a chance to compete for the title next weekend. FanDuel will help you earn your money back that you might have missed on some of those Cinderella stories, betting spreads, totals, game props, and any of the remaining tournament games. I've got my eye on Florida. From the beginning, I've had my eye on Florida to win it all, and they obviously are in the mix here to do it next weekend. Plus, the FanDuel app is super easy to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoops action all tournament long as it concludes next weekend. All right, so another key quote from Jimmy Haslam at the owners' meetings seems to, as we talk about turning the page and looking ahead to a new era of Browns football, this next quote from Jimmy Haslam, I think, is a pretty telling one in terms of the team's philosophy with the second overall pick, but also when it comes to finding a quarterback to replace Deshaun Watson. And it falls in line with, I think, the conversations that have been had about the number 2 pick among the fans and analysts and everybody. But here's what Jimmy had to say about how they'll use that number 2 overall pick overall. I think the message, in terms of a message to his staff and on how to use that pick, is if the right person's there, we're going to take him. If not, we'll figure it out for a year or two until we get the right person. And I just keep saying, we need good football players. There's good football players in this draft, and we have to make sure we get the right ones for us. He went on to talk about how this draft is really important. They got to get this one right. So there is that pressure on Andrew Berry to ensure that he is making picks that have an influence on this team. And having 4 picks in the top 100 gives you a really good opportunity to do that. Having 5 picks in the top 104 picks gives you a really good opportunity to do that. And so, yes, he's got a hit on a good amount of these players, especially given his draft history. The fact that both his only 2 first-round picks he's made here in Cleveland, one is a free agent right now, likely not going to be re-signed and likely going to end up somewhere else, or maybe not at all. He's going to end up somewhere, but for a minimal amount. Didn't see a second contract. Greg Newsom's the other one. Likely not to see a second contract this season. His 5th-year option still with the Browns, but there's rumors that he could be getting shopped. Like, he's got to get these right, whether it's at 2, whether it's at 33, whether they trade up into the first round, which I think they should do, from 33 to get a pick. But like, he has to get players that have a closer to immediate impact on this team and this roster to get this thing back on track. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be a quarterback. And that is, I think, Jimmy Haslam's larger point here, that it has to be the right person at quarterback at that position specifically, because that position is so important if they're going to take him at number 2 overall. We don't know yet if the Browns think that the right person is there at quarterback just yet. They've done their due diligence on a number of these guys, something I want to talk about more with you tomorrow on Tuesday, in terms of some comments that Kevin Stefanski made, and even Andrew Berry in terms of what the quarterback room could look like. So we'll get into that here tomorrow. But I think this is an important note, because as we hear more and more about the Browns potentially just settling on Abdul Carter, these comments sort of lean into that idea that the Browns would not force the issue and take a quarterback at 2, would take Abdul Carter, take maybe more of a project or a developmental player that needs some refining and some work, like a Jalen Milroe. I continue to go back to that name, not because I personally love Jalen Milroe, but because I feel that there's something about it, man. There's just a feeling I have in my gut that tells me this is that the Browns quarterback room is going to have in some capacity, is going to have Jalen Milroe in it. And that could be the guy that they wait for in the late first round or at 33 or whatever. And that's how this thing shakes out. And they sort of try to develop that guy on the fly while letting somebody else, maybe even Kenny Pickett, start for a year. But hearing Jimmy talk about that and talk about like basically exuding this sense of patience is interesting, because it means there is pressure on Berry to get these picks right, as he said, but that maybe he's going to give this thing a couple years to breathe post Deshaun Watson to figure it out. And he's not forcing the issue of like, you got to get this team back you got to get this team back to being competitive immediately this year, or else you're fired. There's no sort of baseline of that going into next year. And I talked about this way earlier in the offseason in regards to have Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski basically, I don't want to say been guaranteed, I think that was the wording I used back then, but have they already been are they operating under the understanding, maybe is a better way to put it, that they have some time here to dig themselves out of the hole, as Jimmy Haslam said, that they created with the Deshaun Watson trade. It certainly seems like they're operating that way right now, that they're going to give this thing time. They're not going to force a quarterback at 2 if they don't think it's right, to try to inject life into this franchise and turn it around immediately. And so that would the sense that I get just from hearing Jimmy Haslam speak and the comments that are circulating and the quotes that are being put out there and transcribed, it sounds like they're going to they're going to give this thing some patience. They're going to give this thing some TLC, and they're not going to rush it and hold anybody's feet to the fire in terms of like win now or you're toast. They're going to let it play out and see how it goes, understanding that they maybe are a couple years away from truly being back to that Super Bowl trajectory or that playoff trajectory. That's important context. That is an important quote and an important thing for, I think, fans to understand, is where ownership's head is at, how they view this thing is important. And it leads into what I said for a segment about turning the page. Like, they're turning the page and accepting the reality that they're now living in, which is, we know we're not competing for Super Bowls right now. We have to take a step back and realize where we are. And we are in a little bit of a rebuild here, even though they're trying to sort of rebuild on the fly with certain pieces still intact and certain core players still intact. They're accepting that that's where they are. And so if you accept that, that shouldn't mean, and I think this is the right approach to take if you're Jimmy Haslam, that shouldn't mean that 2025 is the end all be all for everybody on staff and that everyone is like, that you're on the quote unquote hot seat. You're always on the hot seat, I think, in these jobs anyway, but there shouldn't be any added pressure to like win this year, get back to the playoffs, or you're toast, because that just creates an environment that nobody wants to really operate or work in. And it would force Andrew Berry to potentially do some things that he wouldn't characteristically want to do in a draft if they don't feel comfortable with it. So I think this is the right approach, showing some patience, understanding that your team is not in a good spot right now, but you're hoping to, again, rebuild on the fly is the term I keep going back to. And if you get a couple years worth of drafts right, and you eventually find that quarterback either this year or maybe next year, then all of a sudden you're talking about a team that maybe can get back in the mix for the postseason or Super Bowls quicker than maybe some people have anticipated. Again, I think that's the right approach. I also will say this, though. It's a stance you can have right now, March 31st, April 1st, early April. It's 10 months from now, it could be different, I think, is the point I'm trying to make here. Next January, when a season has been finished, another season is in the books, and if the Browns are a 3-4 win team again, or worse, or better, or slightly better, things can change. I always say a coach generally is as secure as the players buying into their messaging. I've said that for years with Kevin Stefanski. Several times, people, fans have clamored for him to get fired. And I've said, after the 2022 season, when people there was some noise around that, my stance was kind of, listen, if he loses the locker room over the last 6 weeks of the season when this team was kind of out of it, then yeah, I think there's an argument to be made that like maybe they need to visit this as a potential option, like that they would fire Kevin Stefanski. He didn't, and I think that spoke volumes to the belief in that locker room around him. And I think that's the key thing here. Like, if guys are invested, if guys believe in the coach's message and it's still getting through, there's no reason to just like make wholesale changes. But again, a 3-win season, another 3-win season, or another, minimal win season can change a lot of those things. It can change how players feel about coaches or players feel about messaging or the direction of the franchise. Myles Garrett was so frustrated after this past season. He requested a trade, and then it obviously sorted itself out. But those things can perpetuate and get worse and become bigger if losing continues to happen. So I think it is, again, I think Jimmy and D. Haslam are going about it the right way by expressing that they're willing to be patient with what this team needs over the next couple of years to right the ship. I also think in 10 months, they could feel differently about the people in charge, especially Andrew Berry. If some of the guys he drafts don't turn out, or if they do draft a quarterback and he looks like a bust in year one, those are things that ultimately dictate your decision on what you'll do with this regime and this staff moving forward. But I do think like keeping it open-ended in terms of, yes, we're not going to force anything in the draft and make them do something because, we think they got to correct it right now. It's showing them that you're willing to be patient with a little bit of a rebuild here. I think that is the right messaging from ownership to have in support of the people they've empowered to hold these roles, Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski. So some very important messaging, again, in terms of the direction of the franchise. Speaking of the direction of the franchise and what they might do in the NFL draft, we can rule out one thing, because Andrew Berry said it's unlikely that the Browns will be trading up in the first round. And when he says something like that, it means, not trading up in the first round, but trading up to number 1. When he puts his name on things like that pretty publicly, it's usually a pretty good sign that it's true. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. All right, with everything talked about today, tons of stuff with Jimmy Haslam and the Haslams in general in terms of the direction of the franchise. And the next spinoff of that comes comments made by Andrew Berry actually on Sunday night about the number 2 overall pick and the options that they have with it. Now, we know what's on the table. There's 3 things the Browns could essentially do. They could trade back, which has been bandied about quite a bit. Do you trade back, get some more draft capital for a team that needs a lot of pieces the next couple years to fix itself and, take a player a little bit later in the top 10 potentially that still could be impactful for you and still be a starting caliber player for you. It's an idea. I don't hate that idea, obviously. They're staying pat and take a player. I've said if they don't take a quarterback, they should trade back. But if maybe they really like Abdul Carter, as some people are starting to really ramp up that narrative that they do, maybe that's who they take it to and they stay put and do that. Or you trade up to number one. And that idea, for the third of those things, gained a lot of steam last week after Cam Ward held his pro day. Browns had a private workout with him. Titans had a private workout with him. But there was reports that the Titans apparently are still listening to calls for the number one overall pick, even though they are comfortable taking Cam Ward at one, and that seems like what they're going to do. Now, that's all important, but the fact that they are shopping it or listening to offers tells you that there's a chance, they're going to move it, that they're going to move out of the number one spot, and somebody could come get Cam Ward if they really want him. And I talked a little bit about that last week, like the idea of could the Browns do something like that? Back in early March, I got into what it would cost to pull off a trade like that, to move up to number one. And people got mad at me because I was giving out these crazy astronomical trade packages that people didn't like. But the reality is if you trade up, you're going to have to give up a lot to get there. And I think that's the biggest reason why we can rule out the Browns doing something like this, because Andrew Berry, from the horse's mouth himself, said on Sunday night that it's unlikely they would be moving up to number one to take a player, most likely Cam Ward. And so when he says something like that, you can pretty much rule it out as something that the Browns are going to be exploring. They seem pretty comfortable staying at two. Barry doesn't usually put his name on things publicly like that unless he means them. And, frankly, it's not all that surprising that the Browns would not want to trade up, because Barry doesn't really have a history of doing that. I know that he has this reputation of being aggressive on draft day and being aggressive in terms of moving up and down the board with picks in general. But generally when he's done that, it's been more so moving back. Like they moved back to draft like Grant Delpit. They moved back technically when they swung the Elijah Moore trade in 2023. They moved back into the third round because they got a third round pick out of it, got Elijah Moore, traded a second round pick. So like they've moved back more than they've moved up. And the only time I really recall Andrew Berry being aggressive and doing something more assertive, like moving up the board to get somebody, was the year they drafted JOK in 2021, because he was falling so far down the board. And it was an opportunity to snag a player that had a first round grade for a lot of teams, but get him in the second round. And so he moved up to get that one done. And that's been one of his best trade, or one of his best drafted players, one of the easily his biggest hit when it comes to the NFL draft during his tenure here in Cleveland. So other than that, though, like, he's generally a move back guy. And there was a quote that he gave at the combine actually last year in 2024, where he was asked about like keeping the second round pick that they had, because the year before, obviously, like I said, they traded back. When they made the Elijah Moore trade, they gave up their second rounder. And this was year 3 last year of not having a first round pick because of the Deshaun Watson trade. And he had this quote about like, me, I can't seem to keep money in my pocket. And it was kind of to insinuate, he has a tendency of trading back, like using the money in his pocket to maximize his money, like get more money on top of that. And so he likes to be aggressive in that way, but not so much the opposite, where he trades up the board. And so, again, reading the tea leaves on this, understanding the history of Andrew Berry when it comes to the NFL draft, and obviously hearing it straight from the horse's mouth, his comments about the idea that it's unlikely that they'll trade up, I think that pretty much closes the door on the Browns acquiring Cam Ward, or the Browns at least trading up to get Cam Ward. Unless the Titans surprise everybody and they take somebody else and they shock the world in that way, or they trade back and somebody else trades up and takes somebody else, Cam Ward is probably not going to be available to the Browns when they're on the clock at number 2. And whatever they decide to do with the pick after that is to be determined. But as much as it seems like they're interested in Cam Ward, because they did have the private workout with him and they've at least done their due diligence on him, I don't think that's going to be in the cards for this team. And so you're left deciding between Shedeur Sanders, another quarterback, Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter or trading back. But I think, a telling message from Andrew Berry in terms of where their heads are at right now going into the draft. And it seems like they are content taking another player that isn't Cam Ward at 2, and figuring out who that is amongst themselves as a group, what their staff thinks is that they're going to get the most value out of. It might still be a quarterback, but they feel like the value is there, that they don't have to necessarily do something more drastic or push the envelope or force the issue on getting specifically Cam Ward, because they like enough of these other guys at 2 to pull the trigger on one of them if they decide to stay put. So that's an interesting note to come out of the NFL owners meetings, on top of the comments from the Haslams, of course. And it sets the tone now as we turn the page on March, going into April, on this team's philosophy moving ahead into the NFL draft later this month or later in April, as we're just 24 days away now from the Browns essentially being on the clock pretty quickly. And maybe they already are on the clock, because it sounds like the Titans are taking Cam Ward with that number 2 overall pick. So a lot of good stuff coming from Palm Beach, Florida at the NFL owners meetings as far as the Browns are concerned. And we didn't even get a chance to get into what Kevin Stefanski talked about in his media session down there in Florida. So that'll lead the way for us on Tuesday's show, because speaking of the Browns considering quarterbacks in the draft, it sounds like they've pretty much finalized the QB big board that they have for this draft class. We'll talk about that, why Andrew Berry thinks the quarterback room could skew younger this year, and much, much more on tomorrow's show. So please make sure you do the thing I tell you to do every single episode. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure Locked On Browns is your first listen every day. And for your second listen, be sure to check out Locked On NFL Draft, or you can keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thanks for being an everyday here at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. Peace.